This hearing of the Agriculture, Rural Development, Related Agencies Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee is now called to order. As this hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters. For today's meeting, the chair and staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask that if you would like for the staff to unmute you, if you indicate approval by nodding, the staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You'll notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, then alternating between majority and minority. Members present at the time of the hearing, is called to order and will be recognized then in the order of seniority. And then finally, members who are not present at the time the hearing is called to order will be called in the order of their appearance. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we've set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or our markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Last reminder, please ensure that your video is turned on at this time. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's hearing on USDA's Rural Development Mission Area. Testifying before the subcommittee today is the Honorable Justin Maxson, the Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at USDA. Congratulations on your new role as Deputy Undersecretary. Mr. Maxson comes from the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation and has spent almost all of his career working in rural America, addressing issues of poverty and of economic and racial equity and injustice. Undersecretary Maxson, you have a long history that demonstrates your passion and commitment for empowering rural communities and bringing equity, opportunity, prosperity, and enhanced quality of life to these areas, so many of which have been under-resourced and neglected, thereby placing them at a distinct disadvantage as compared with many urban and suburban areas. It is evident throughout your career that you and I share the belief that no child or family in America should ever have the opportunity to realize their full potential limited or shunted because of the zip code they happen to live in. Unfortunately, that is the case all across rural America, and the pandemic has made that plain. So I welcome you to our subcommittee today, along with the current leaders of your rural development agencies, Dr. Karama Neal, Administrator of Rural Business Cooperative Service, Mr. Chad Parker, Acting Administrator of the Rural Housing Service, and Mr. Christopher McLean, Acting Administrator of Rural Utility Service. Undersecretary Maxson, you point out in your written testimony that Secretary Vilsack recently laid out for the subcommittee the department's overarching priorities containing the pandemic, promoting racial justice and equity, addressing the mounting hunger and nutrition crisis, rebuilding the rural economy, strengthening and building markets for farmers and producers, and addressing the impacts of climate change while building back better in rural America. But Mr. Maxson, you really teed up the real importance of this hearing today and of the mission of the Rural Development Agency in the next paragraph of your testimony, which struck such a powerful and vibrant chord that I wanted to jump up and shout, just like they do in the South Georgia Baptist Church. I quote, "When appropriately modernized and resourced, rural development's unique mission and incredible set of economic and community development tools play a critical role in advancing outcomes-based inclusive prosperity across rural America. We create jobs and help rural places build and maintain wealth within their communities. Rural development helps to finance the building of critical community facilities like schools, libraries, hospitals, and public safety buildings. We provide distance learning and telemedicine equipment, connecting underserved communities with educational opportunities and health professionals. Rural development funds water and wastewater facilities, giving rural places clean and safe drinking water. We help to modernize and expand electricity and broadband connectivity to bring rural communities into the 21st century. We fund clean, renewable energy, and we are poised to help rural America lead the nation in a bio-based manufacturing revolution powered by the amazing productivity of American farmers and producers. We are well positioned to be a driving force for racial and spatial equity, reaching underserved communities and ensuring that rural communities have the same tools and resources and access as urban communities. Let the church say amen. Praise the Lord. If only that were true. If only that were real. But Undersecretary Maxson, Dr. Neal, Mr. Parker, Mr. McLean, we look forward today to your telling us how to make that real and to tell us how this subcommittee and the Congress can help you to do it. At this time, I am delighted to yield to my ranking member, my friend, and my partner in this endeavor, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry. Mr. Fortenberry, you are recognized now for your opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. First, let me deviate from my prepared remarks. I'm so grateful as well for your partnership and leadership and the passion that you just showed. I wrote one thing down that you referenced, outcome-based inclusive opportunity in rural America. That is beautifully said. I'm going to say it a little differently, but I think you know that we're all pulling in the same direction to achieve that very end. So again, thank you for your passion and your excellent means of communicating this in the most human terms. I'm really grateful, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Maxson, Dr. Neal, Mr. Parker, and my fellow Nebraskan, Mr. McLean, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Let me say this from the outside. Our chairman, Chairman Bishop, has heard me say this many times. I think we need to update the term rural development. And Mr. Chairman, I should confess to you that I gave our crack appropriations staff an assignment. I wanted to look back in the history books and find out when the term rural development began. The earliest reference that we can find to it was in 1902 but then it's been commonly used since the 1940s. And clearly it was a useful term in its heyday, but I do believe in this era, when many people must leave the farm to seek better income or just to get health insurance, when two-thirds of rural communities, two-thirds of rural counties, I should say, have lost population just in this last decade, and also when new emerging opportunities for a regeneration of rural life are right around the corner, I feel that rural development is an inadequate term for the task at hand. So instead of rural development, I'm going to once again propose the idea that we use the phrase ecosystem of rural livability. And here's why. Life in rural America is not just an economic proposition. It's a values proposition. We're embracing meaningful work, sacrificing, risking now for a future return, and connecting to the land and to one's neighbor are the defining characteristics of so much of America. And it's this land and all the land that embodies that is the heart of the rural values proposition. Our farmers and ranchers are its chief and most exemplary representatives, transferring their land to the next generation of family farmers and starting to fully participate in this exciting new world of telework and telehealth and precision agriculture, distance learning, and global e-commerce, as well as nurturing beginning farmers. And that's the way. Mr. Chairman, I like this story. The Brugger brothers came back to the family farm in Nebraska after they had spent time at the university here in Lincoln and graduated. These young men could be a reality TV show. I hope you meet them one day, Mr. Chairman. They had noticed that their local bar in town had closed, so they started growing their own hops and using excess feed for whiskey. They even purchased the local bar. Remember, they have a traditional production row crop farm. They purchased the local bar and so that their friends and families didn't have to drive so far for some good entertainment. They brought local life back to their rural community because they understood it's an ecosystem of livability. They added value and they profited from it. So it's the vertical integration of this kind that puts value in the value chain, where it belongs, in the farmer's pocket and toward community flourishing. So gentlemen, as your agencies help us rebuild rural America, I believe they need a rebuild of their own. The federal government runs 90 programs administered by 16 different federal agencies targeted at rural economic development. And you have the official lead. To my knowledge, there is no overarching framework to guide rural policy at the federal level. So finally, let's speak about the possibility of enhanced rural broadband. We throw a lot of money at it, but do we really know what we're getting? When the Inspector General at our chairman's request appeared before the subcommittee earlier this year, I asked, how do we measure broadband success? She said, I don't know. I think we need to change that equation. Again, Mr. Chairman, distinguished panelists, creating this ecosystem of rural livability means not only focusing on wires laid or loans given or housing subsidized, but on how measuring real world human impacts of these essential investments in rural America are faring. So let's work hard together to make those determinations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. Mr. Maxson, without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record. And I will now recognize you for your statement, and then we will proceed with questions. You are now recognized, Mr. Maxson, for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate both those comments, Mr. Fortenberry and members of this committee. It's an honor to be here today. Let me start out by telling you a little bit about myself. Before I came to the USDA, I spent 6 years running a foundation advancing economic opportunity and racial equity in the American South. And 15 years before that, I did community economic development in Appalachian, Kentucky. And rural development was a key partner in that work. I am so glad to be at rural development. I share a deep commitment to helping people and communities realize their economic vision and a high quality of life. When Secretary Vilsack was here a few weeks ago, he shared a set of key priorities that cut across our work. They include, but aren't limited to, containing the pandemic and promoting racial equity, addressing the impacts of climate change, tackling the mounting hunger crisis, and rebuilding the rural economy. We believe that rural development has the programmatic tools and mission to make major contributions around those priorities. The budget in front of us builds on our key programs and expands them, acknowledges there are things that RD can and should do better. And it helps us make real progress on our mission to promote economic prosperity for all. At RD, we recognize that rural America is not monolithic. It has impressive economic and racial, and cultural, and geographic diversity. When thinking about the rural economy alone, only 20% of rural counties are farming dependent. In manufacturing, government, recreation, mining dependence, each separately claim 10 to 15% of those of those counties. And the final third of rural counties are not reliant on any one industry. So obviously rural America has got diverse needs, and its communities and people reflect a diverse vision of what they want. And we're working hard to be flexible and meet communities where they are. I think rural development has got some unique strengths. We have an impressive history of innovation, sharing the right things at the right time. I think the Reconnect program for broadband has the potential to do for people and communities what the rural electrification program did, spread a life-changing innovation at a critical time. We're also extremely locally focused with a network of 450 offices with boots on the ground across the country. And we bring, of course, as you all know, a broad array of programs that meet communities where they are, from small business support to housing, from water and sewer to broadband, and reliable and affordable electricity infrastructure. The budget also recognizes that RD can do more, that we can be better. We have a great staff, but we need more of that staff, and soon. Our portfolio is more than twice as large as it was only 10 years ago, with a staff that is 30% smaller. And in 3 years' time, 1/3 of that staff is eligible for retirement. Some of our local partners and our communities report our programs can be difficult to access and are narrow, sometimes out of date. And too many times, it's the better resource communities that are the most successful at accessing our support. And that's just not good enough. We want to help everyone in rural America thrive, particularly the communities in the most need. This budget aims to advance the priorities of the administration and deepen our ability to carry out RD's important work. It provides us with additional resources to expand access to broadband, increases our ability to deliver water and sewer infrastructure, allows us to better support our rural electric co-op partners in providing clean and affordable electricity, and it enables us to expand and better coordinate our USDA boots on the ground and partner with other federal development agencies and provide deeper support to the communities in the most need. In my short time at RD, I have been incredibly impressed by the quality of our staff, the breadth of our programs, and the scale of our investment. In 2020 alone, RD invested more than $40 billion across the country. Thank you for making that possible. I know that when RD's programs are implemented in the communities in the most need, impactful change is evident and unforgettable. I look forward to working with the subcommittee and answering any and all questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maxson. We will now proceed with questions. As I mentioned earlier, we will begin with the chair and ranking member, then alternating majority and minority with members present at the time the hearing starts in the order of seniority. After that, I will recognize members not present at the time of the hearing, at the beginning of the hearing, and each member will have 5 minutes in each round, so please be mindful of your time. I will now recognize myself for the first round of questions. Mr. Maxson, you stated in your testimony that the rural development portfolio is 10 times larger than it was a decade ago, and that your staff is not as great as is needed to achieve the mission. You know what the problem is in terms of staffing. Do you have a specific plan, and is included in the budget a specific plan to address these staffing shortages? And I will follow that with a capacity building question regarding our rural communities, because it's often difficult for the underserved rural communities to apply for government grants and loans due to capacity constraints. They simply don't have the staff or the resources to manage this process. I've seen this in my own congressional districts, and I've heard it from other members. So through the delivery of technical assistance, we can really build that capacity through training and support on specific issues unique to their circumstances. Do you agree with that? Do we, both Congress and the administration, need to do more in this space? And what do you think we can do to help create that capacity in our rural communities so that they can access the resources that rural development has and that USDA has for them?
Sir, I appreciate that. In fact, I appreciate the two questions, as I actually think they're, at least in my mind, they're related. On the staffing front, obviously our field structure is, I think, a real important aspect of what makes RD a unique player in this space. We obviously see that more staff on the ground are one of the ways that we can actually help provide capacity, that we can lean into the provision of assistance. We've got key partnerships in a number of our programs where some of those partners are on the ground and help provide technical assistance to communities. I think we believe additional staff are one of the ways that we can help go even further and serve communities that aren't easily able to access our programs. Obviously, I think we see our salary and expense levels as one key way the committee can support staff, as that obviously pays for the boots on the ground. There are also some program design concerns, like in the Reconnect program, that's designed in such a way that we can use some of those funds to support administrative costs and other implementation expenses, including our staff, including that sort of important technical assistance that helps build capacity on the ground. So those are a couple of ideas. I think we're looking carefully at ways that we can expand our staff. The Strike Force initiative described in the budget itself is an opportunity to both support staff at RD and other development agencies that are working in the rural space, and make us think more thoroughly about how we collaborate together. And just the last thing I'll say, we share your commitment to a capacity building, that figuring out ways that our staff and others can help build the capacity of local organizations, of small towns, is just critical to our ability to meet the needs that those communities have. And we recognize programs like the Rural Partnership Program and the American Jobs Plan is a critical tool to help communities access the sort of resources that they need to have the sophistication and the skill necessary to access some of our other programs.
Thank you, Mr. Maxson. And at this time, although my time is not yet expired, it's about expired, I'll be happy to yield to my ranking member, Mr. Fortenberry, for any questions that he might have at this time. Mr. Fortenberry, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Maxson, you didn't respond to my proposal about the ecosystem of livability. I'd like to hear your opinion on that. But let me go ahead with a little more direct question first for you. What is the USDA doing to coordinate, to work with other parts of the federal government, I should say, to coordinate rural broadband efforts?
Thank you for that question, sir. I'm fascinated by your proposal. I think rural livability is a really interesting phrase, and I think it reflects the actual complication of attempting to do this work. So I would love to follow up with you and have a longer conversation. I think economic concerns are key, but not sufficient to meet the challenges that rural communities experience.
Well, if I could interject right quick, the reason we tend to default to economic terms because we can measure it. The harder, more subjective aspects of livability and well-being are harder to put a number on. But then we translate language that really is inhuman. And what we're talking about here is the most human of things: well-being, opportunity, solidarity, being able to enjoy the pastoral quality of life, which really is the hallmark of America. So this is why I proposed it. So I'm happy that you responded generously. Thank you. But the next, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'd like to ask Acting Administrator McLean to address the way we collaborate around broadband.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, yes, thank you very much. The RUS has been working with the Federal Communications Commission and the National Telecommunications Information Administration. We have regular meetings with each other. We've have an initiative, it's called the American Broadband Initiative. And we share information, we share data, we share our mapping information with each other, and coordinate our programmings to make sure that we don't overlap and we sequence our work together.
What's the outcome of that coordination? Right now, I think it's fair to say that we have fragmentation, and the outcome, obviously, we're striving for is enhanced accessibility and affordability. Those are the key metrics. So speak to the outcome of the deliberations, not just the process, and as it lends itself toward enhanced accessibility and affordability, please.
Sure, absolutely. And of course, the core vision of our program is to be able to use our affordable financing, and with the great support of this committee, the Reconnect program, which for the last several years has committed meaningful grant dollars to the RUS program to be able to bring broadband to where it hasn't been before. And so an example of that coordination is RUS loan programs frequently leverage the universal service support mechanisms of the Federal Communications Commission. We take into account the RDOF, or the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, funding opportunities that the FCC has made in terms of how we structure our programs. And we do work together to make sure we don't overlap.
Let me interject. I'm sorry, my time's going to run out shortly. So give us a metric of progress. Can you give us a metric of progress? Remember, in my opening statement, I asked Inspector General, how are we measuring the effectiveness of this? And she couldn't answer. This is not a judgment or an indictment of her. It's just simply that I think we have to work harder on the metrics of success.
Sure. Well, I think one of the most fundamental metrics of success is the delivery of broadband services to where it wasn't before. I mean, that's where you have to start. You have to deliver the infrastructure so that communities can take advantage of that infrastructure. And we see that right away. We see that in the job creation. We see that in healthcare opportunities. We see that in educational opportunities. The pandemic has given us an incredible research opportunity, but also incredible examples of what happens when you don't have broadband.
That's right. I'm going to interrupt you, sir. I'm sorry, because I only have 15 seconds left. That's exactly the point. I think we've made a digital leap in the pandemic, but it also, in addition to creating huge opportunities for us, it helps us identify the weak spots. I think we need to come back. I think we need to come back to this question. So I'll yield back to the chairman now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. At this time, I'm happy to yield to the gentlelady from Maine, Ms. Shelley Pingree. Ms. Pingree.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing, and congratulations, Mr. Maxson. I'm very excited to see you in this role, and I know that the great depth of experience that you've had working in rural communities will serve rural development very well. So thank you for being here with us today. I think because we're all talking about broadband, you'll quickly note that it's a very bipartisan interest on this committee. It, sort of stretches to all geographies. And frankly, each of us claim that our district is the worst served by broadband, but mine is. Mine's 49th in the country in access and 49th in the country for speed. And we occasionally move up the list. So, but we're always close to the bottom. So I want to dig in on a few of the details since we're really talking about it. And one of my concerns is in our state about the smaller communities that are so anxious to get access to broadband. And you used a phrase what I really appreciated, that was better resource communities shouldn't be the only ones who have access to rural development programs. Very few communities in Maine have a town planner on their staff. We have lots and lots of small communities. And so they don't really have the capacity to be able to apply for some of the grants or jump through some of the hoops that are necessary. And they're often served by small ISPs who are trying very hard to get the connection to rural parts of their state. So I have a couple of parts to this. I'm interested to know how you conceive that rural development could work, particularly through the Reconnect program, to support smaller grantees, and if it would ever be possible, for instance, to have projects under $5 million have a little bit less of a challenge. And I just want to use an example that I recently learned. So there are 3 communities in our state that were awarded funding through Reconnect in January of 2019. They've been following the guidelines, but 2 of those 3 are not expected to connect a single resident until spring of 2023. So that's a long, slow build. We compared it to some of the projects that were funded through our state using the CARES Act funds, and they're going to be completing in 8 to 12 months. So I'm not completely sure what the big differences are, but I think it's a good example that gives us a chance to try to understand how do we make this workable and not only available to larger communities with, big staffs and resources to jump through the hoops.
Thank you for that. So 2 quick thoughts, and then I'd like to ask, again, Chris McLean, after 103 days, I don't have that much detail, and that was a very detailed question. 100% we believe that we are committed to doing everything we can to spread truly high-speed broadband to 100% of the country. And I think that American Jobs Plan identifies the scale of resources necessary to make that happen. And I'll ask Acting Administrator McLean to pick up from there.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for that question, because one of the great benefits of the Reconnect funding formula that this committee and the Congress has provided is the 7% solution, which the acting undersecretary has referenced. In other words, that you gave us 7% of our funding to be able to put to outreach and technical assistance and administrative support. One of the things we're doing with those resources is trying to build an application system that is customer friendly, so that you can apply for Reconnect funds and minimize the levels of mistakes or errors so that you can stay in the game. Another thing that we've done this year is we did a second chance on our second round of funding so that we could take a deeper look at those projects that were really close but needed a little bit more effort to be able to get it across the finish line. And then one of the guiding principles we have, and again, thank you to the bottom of our heart for providing meaningful grant support to this mission, because then we can use grant dollars and target them to the communities that need it the most. And that's really the key to be able to have under-resourced communities. Because when our portfolio was only a small grant program in Community Connect and loan dollars, that missed a large number of communities that needed more help. So that ability to be able to take grants to the most needy areas, loan grant combos to those in the middle, and loan only to those that can afford it seems to be a good pathway for us forward. But I agree absolutely with you and the acting undersecretary that we do need to be able to focus both technical assistance and outreach to those small communities. You're absolutely right.
Thank you so much. I'm out of time, but I appreciate your thoughts on that, and we might follow up with a couple more of the specifics just so we can better understand where the challenges are. But thank you, appreciate it, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Mr. Maxon. A couple of issues. First, the Community Facilities Loan and Grant Program, very important in my district, as many rural districts, because important facilities such as hospitals and fire departments use this. In my district, East Newmarket Volunteer Fire Department, for instance, has one of these loans, but they're frustrated because interest rates are now at generational lows, but they are having a problem refinancing this because they're uncertain, first of all, whether USDA can refinance them through the USDA, or whether or not they can go to a private refinance, or do they need the permission of USDA to refinance and take advantage of these low rates. As you know, these volunteer fire departments are financially hurting because of COVID, their inability to raise monies, and this would substantially help them financially.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to ask Acting Administrator Parker, who is a specialist in the CF program.
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. And appreciate the committee's support of the Community Facilities Direct Loan, Guaranteed Loan, and Grant Program. There is authority to refinance projects under our Community Facilities Guaranteed Loan Program, where a private sector lender would come in and make a loan, and USDA would put a community facilities guarantee on that loan. Typically, those rates are not as low as our community facilities direct loan interest rates. We do not have the authority presently available in order to offer refinancing under the Community Facilities Direct Loan Program, unless it's the refinancing is less than 50% of the total project cost. So if they were doing some other construction or an expansion, we could go in and refinance a portion of that loan. They don't need USDA permission to come in and refinance with a private sector lender. They would just present us with a payoff at that time. Thank you for the question.
No, thank you very much. And because broadband is obviously, it is broad, widely bipartisan interest in that. We do have providers in the Broadband Initiative Program who have taken advantage of, who have applied and have actually gotten awards, but they have expressed some of them have expressed their frustration with the administrative burden that accompanies receiving the funds. Their complaints to my office include outdated contract language, overly prescriptive auditing and cost justification requirements, as well as the process just generally being slow to the point of discouraging some of the providers from participating in the program. While I do appreciate clearly, thoughtful and diligent stewardship of taxpayer dollars is always important, I am sensitive to some of their complaints. So are you aware of those types of issues with some of the providers who in fact have these contracts to provide broadband service?
Yes, sir, absolutely. We take seriously the concerns of our partners who are recipients of of these resources and are doing everything we can to make the application and the reporting process as smooth as possible, let me ask Administrator McLean. He may have a couple of more specifics that he can share there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Congressman. Your point is very well taken. We are vigilant, I will say, with our supervision of the funds. We take great pride in the fact that we can pretty much check every penny that is expended. And not every federal program can do that. Even every federal broadband program can do that because we're infrastructure oriented. And so, yes, I understand. And we took special care during COVID to be careful about that burden we are putting on our borrowers and our awardees. So, but yes, we do understand, and we're trying to make that as customer friendly as possible. In terms of the pace of approval, these programs are very, very popular, and they're very competitive, and we have oversubscription, so we have to carefully weigh the projects, to score them against each other, and be able to work to make sure that they are successful. We do want to minimize the administrative burden, but at the same time, we don't want to let down our guard on vigilance with taxpayer dollars, because these are serious undertakings. And again, thanks to the help of this committee, these are substantial awards.
All right, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. At this time, I'm delighted to yield to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Mark Pocain. Mr. Pocain, you are now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. And thanks to our witnesses. I guess in this committee, or probably maybe in Congress, if it's a day ending in Y, it's Broadband Day, because we all want to talk about broadband. So as one of the founders of the Rural Broadband Caucus, bipartisan caucus, by the way, I live in a rural town of 800 some people, just got broadband 3 years ago. We had a satellite prior to that where I was paying an ungodly amount to try to be connected. One of the issues with trying to get this investment that we're trying to put into broadband that the president's proposing and through Reconnect is that many local communities and states have barriers that make it harder to get the dollars out. They don't allow municipalities to do their own broadband. Can you talk for a second about the difficulty it is in getting Reconnect out when some of the utilities in local communities have these local barriers, and what we might be able to do to get around those?
If you would, Chris.
Sure, I'd be delighted to. One of the things that we've encouraged in the Reconnect structure is a level of consultation at the state and local level. And we want to encourage states to be able to remove those barriers. Of course, as a federal agency, we're a lender, a funder. We don't have preemption authority over state rules regarding what municipalities can and cannot invest in. But we have seen across the country that municipal utilities are an incredibly powerful force to bring infrastructure to rural America. In fact, our entire water program is based on municipal investment. And so it is a model that works. We support it. We invest in cooperative nonprofit entities and for-profit entities, as well as municipal and tribal communities, and welcome that. And we welcome states opening up their authorities so that we can find the right partner to solve the riddle of broadband deployment.
Well, thank you for that. And let me do a follow-up from Mr. Harris's question, also on the Reconnect funds. So we've heard that sometimes that application process can be slow. We had one applicant who waited well over a year before finding out they were receiving a Reconnect award, getting the first construction permit approved. Just wondering if there's things that we can do to make that application process a little more maybe user-friendly and get those dollars out faster.
Yeah, well, thank you. I will echo what the acting undersecretary said. Investment in technology and investment in staffing will help speed the processing along. What we've done with that 7% solution I told you about earlier in the Reconnect award, and that is by the design from Congress on how they were able to use those funds, and we appreciate that. We are building the most modern of our intake systems using those Reconnect funds to try to make it easier to apply. Now, in Reconnect, we make the award first, and then we go into the environmental review. Usually has been opposite, where we do the environmental review, then you go to the underwriting. But in order to speed the obligation process, and so that applicants could be assured that they were getting the funding they needed in order to go through that environmental review, we made the award subject to the approval. And COVID, frankly, has slowed that down a little bit, as we had to get, needed more time to have consultations with state historic preservation offices and tribal historic preservation offices.
Great.
And as the end of COVID is in sight, we're hoping that that will be able to speed up, as well as adding to the capacity of our ability to process.
Great, thank you. In the 45 seconds left, Mr. Maxson, I'm going to ask you a big question, but as you know, there's a lot of consolidation going on in agriculture. 85% of the U.S. beef market is for companies. Wondering what rural development can do to combat that increasing power those giant agribusinesses are having on my rural constituents.
Thank you for that question. We think small businesses are critical and have a range of tools that can support them with the sort of flexible capital that small businesses need to get ahead, from grants through the value-added producer grant to loans through the IRP program to other things. USDA as a whole is taking on this question with real appreciation and a range of tools aimed at helping local food systems accelerate.
Great, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize Mr. Valadeo of California. Mr. Valadeo, you are now recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. I want to make sure that I don't distract too much away from the broadband issue, because that is a huge issue for all of us, and I think that's, and I appreciate all my colleagues bringing that up. But I do need to bring something up that's just a little bit different. I've been meeting with folks all over my district over the past few weeks, and because of this ongoing pandemic, many constituents are not able to pay their utility bills, and this is creating a huge burden, especially on my community service districts. Some of these small communities, I met with one just yesterday, very small community, and their normal delinquent rate is dollar amount is about $2,000, and they're up to $20,000. I had some that were normally around $200,000 or up to $600,000. And so obviously for these community districts to be able to service the communities, provide water, sewage, is already difficult enough. You add in the fact that these guys are seeing double, triple, and sometimes 10 times the amount of delinquency. Then when we get into the process of applying for grants or other types of resources, this big of a hole in their budget makes it more difficult for them to come up with matching funds. Do you have any plans to be able to help these community service districts, cities, counties, and others who are struggling with this, and how do you plan to address it?
Thank you. It's a great question. We've spent significant time trying to understand the conditions in which the districts find themselves. It is painful and important that we figure out the right tools. Again, I'm going to ask Acting Administrator McLean to share his thoughts on this, as he's been closest to these conversations.
Yes, thank you very much. And as a lender, of course, we are equally concerned about that issue of delinquent accounts, and we expect that to return to a more normal level post-pandemic. So we see this as a transitory problem at the moment. For individual consumers, it's a very serious issue. And in the Rescue Act, there were several resources that were made available for consumers. Enhanced funding for a low-income home energy assistance program. The Department of Treasury has a homeowners assistance program that has among its authorities the ability to be able to help pay utility bills. And we work with our borrowers and many of them have programs that they have adopted themselves to be able to help consumers through that crisis. Where we have a utility that is affected by a liquidity crunch, as you say, we do have some tools available to be able to help them get over this hump of the pandemic. We do still believe that they're fundamentally strong and will be able to endure this. And I don't have any, in the utilities program, we don't have any specific programs that are directed towards individuals, but to the extent we can work with our utility borrowers to extend grace to those troubled consumers, we're absolutely all in and helping.
Well, I look forward to that. That's something I'll have my staff reach out to yours to make sure that whatever is available, we're able to help provide, because in some of these situations, the folks that are administering the community service districts were telling me that there are programs out there, but a lot of times it requires the constituent to actually fill out the documentation and do some of the work, and they're not even willing to do that. And so it puts these community service districts in a really bad spot. And so when we look for grant opportunities, any capital that they might possibly have has been eaten up by this, and it just puts them in a terrible bind.
Yeah, absolutely, and we get those heartbreaking messages from individual consumers that can't pay their bills. First, we refer them to the utility who may have programs available, and then to the state agencies that are administering programs like LIHEAP. And LIHEAP also has some availability to help on water utilities as well.
So LIHEAP does have the opportunity to help with some of the water utilities when it comes to
yes, I believe so. Yes.
Community. All right, perfect. Thank you. I've got more questions, but I'll wait till the next round since I only have 30 seconds. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. And at this time, I'm delighted to yield to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Lauren Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. One of the counties in my district, much of which is rural, has no inpatient hospital within the county lines, which means that during this pandemic, the county's ICU capacity has been zero. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, these communities face critical healthcare shortages, including a lack of mental and behavioral health services, facilities, and professionals. These access gaps have been especially concerning as our communities grapple with the opioid epidemic and other substance use disorders. Mr. Maxon, can you describe the barriers rural communities face when attempting to finance healthcare facilities and infrastructure, and what the rural development agencies are doing to address these barriers, both independently and in coordination with agencies at the Department of Health and Human Services or other federal partners?
Thank you for your question. There's so many reasons that rural healthcare is critical, as you obviously note. The health of local residents as economic engines that create jobs and help provide a high quality of life. We've taken seriously, particularly over the last several years, their health, economic health. The community facilities program, grant, loan, and guarantee has been particularly focused on health facilities. If I could ask Acting Administrator Parker, he has specialized in healthcare facilities.
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman Underwood. Very much appreciate the committee's support of our rural healthcare facilities. We often hear from them about workforce shortages inside the rural areas, lack of training and capacity, bypassing the rural healthcare facility to go to a more urban facility, causing lack of patients there.
If we could just talk about the solution, sir, I'm sorry, we have limited time. What are you all doing to address this?
Yes, ma'am. So we have both our community facilities direct loan and grant program. 48% of our portfolio is invested in rural healthcare facilities. We also appreciate what the committee has recently given us, the emergency rural healthcare grant funding that provided $500 million in funding to address health related facilities, testing and vaccine facilities also related to the pandemic. So we're working very quickly to be able to get out funding notice and make those funds available to rural communities that are in need of healthcare solutions.
And outside of the COVID environment, have you all been working with HHS on this issue?
Yes, we partner with HHS, especially the Health Resources Services Administration.
Mhm.
Have a number of stakeholders, the National Health Association, the National Health Clinic Association that we work closely with.
Okay. If there are any actions that we can take in Congress to support USDA's actions in that area, we'll go ahead and submit a QFR for that. And if you all could respond in writing, that would be great. I look forward to continuing the dialogue on how we can support the rural healthcare needs. It's so important not only for the health of our rural communities, but for the economy and the job markets in those areas, as you mentioned. Now, during his confirmation hearing, Secretary Vilsack stated that biofuels should be part of the effort to reduce carbon emissions on our path to net zero by 2050. And I know that many corn growers in my districts were heartened by those statements. The biofuel market is absolutely critical for farmers in my district and the economy of Illinois. In recent years, we've seen that it's been especially tough given the Trump administration's abuse of small refinery waivers and the disruptions caused by the pandemic. So this is for Mr. Maxon or Dr. Neal. The White House's skinny budget and the American Jobs Plan don't currently have a lot of details on biofuels infrastructure. Can you elaborate on your role, at least within the agency, around biofuel programs and USDA's and the administration's climate strategy?
Yes, thank you for that. I'll just really quickly say in the American Jobs Plan, there's $15 billion, a large chunk of which is aimed at the bio-based product loan guarantee program, 9003. Which aims to support the commercialization of bio-based products. I'm not privy to how much of that 15 billion will be aimed at the 9003, but I believe the secretary is very serious when he says biofuels and bio-based products have got to be part of our long-term set of climate solutions.
Okay, so is that something that your office is involved with or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Very much so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. At this time, I recognize Mr. Molinar, the gentleman from Michigan. You are now recognized, Mr. Molinar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses today, and appreciate the work you're doing and the importance of rural development. I wanted to mention, and you may or may not be aware of the flooding event that occurred in mid-Michigan in May of 2020. Last year's catastrophic flood was the result of a historic rain event that led to the failure of 2 dams in my district. And the devastating events of that day essentially wiped out a 100-year-old ecosystem created by the lakes and dams and caused about $200 million in damage, with millions more lost to the economic impact and the hardship it has had around the small communities surrounding. And a major disaster declaration was issued by the president last July, and the USDA was one of the first federal agencies to respond, and I was very grateful for that. Former USDA Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development, Betty Brand, came to our district with a pledge to support our recovery process. That's been happening, and the rebuilding and recovery efforts continue as we speak. And I just want to personally say on behalf of thousands of mid-Michigan residents whose lives or businesses have been affected by this disaster, especially the 10,000 residents that were forced to evacuate out, I thank you for the work you've been doing, and I want to ask for your strong support in the recovery process as we go forward. Along those lines, I'd also like to invite you to come and visit mid-Michigan to see firsthand the work that rural development is doing to support the recovery and rebuilding efforts from last year's historic flood, as well as the work that still needs to be done. Broadband is key, connecting our underserved and unserved residents, and I want to just also highlight that as well. I wondered if you might comment on if you're familiar with the situation, and if so, or if not, is that something we could follow up and have a discussion to kind of look at the progress that's been made as well as things that still need to be worked on?
Yes, sir. I'm broadly familiar with it, but I would love to have an opportunity to speak with you and hear about it from your standpoint. And I would love to do that face-to-face when that's possible to do.
Wonderful. And I will follow up with you on that, and I'm grateful. And Mr. Chairman, I know we have other questions, but I want to yield back and thank you for your work on rural broadband. That's huge in my district as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molinar. At this time, I'm delighted to yield to the gentlelady from Minnesota, the chair of the Defense Subcommittee of Appropriations. Ms. McCollum, you are now recognized.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and I want to thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, as well as your whole team here and everybody at USDA for all the work that they've done during COVID and going through a transition that didn't go very smoothly and now working on getting the budget done. So I know you folks are working really hard for us. And Mr. Maxon, I appreciate in your written testimony, and I really mean this, about the impact of broadband and it had on some of our tribal communities and the role of rural development can play in continuing to help to bridge this digital divide. The pandemic intensified the digital divide, and as my fellow members of Congress know, Native Americans proportionately suffered more than any other group during this pandemic. And we know that most of them are isolated, very isolated in rural America. So this new sense of urgency to address these inadequacies is upon us, and we want to do something about it. But tribal communities, to be clear, like other rural communities, maybe even more so, have struggled with access to have reliable, affordable broadband for years. And they are some of the most underserved populations across the country. The lack of broadband inhibits tribal communities to support things like economic development, healthcare, and public safety. And the biggest impact for them has truly been on education in their rural and remote areas. The Bureau of Indian Schools are chronically underfunded. They're operating with aging technologies, computer equipment if they have it, laptops or even tablets if they have them. 36% of Native students have no access to the internet in their home. Tribal colleges and universities are faced with the same chronic underfunding problems as they go into the pandemic. And they have some of the slowest internet speeds at the highest cost. Many of the institutions of higher education in this country are really lacking reliable internet connectivity for their students when they go home. So these disparities put Native American risks at a distinct disadvantage to their peers across the country. Their ability to compete in the 21st century economy is dependent upon the internet. It has the potential to worsen with generational poverty if we don't do something about this. So I would, like to hear more about, because you understand these unique challenges into my rural brothers and sisters. I have family who live in the rural parts of the United States too. I get rural. But could you maybe tell us a little more about what you're going to do to help tribal schools, and at the same time, you're helping tribal healthcare?
Thank you for that. It's an incredibly important set of concerns. If the pandemic has underlined nothing else, it's clearly made obvious that broadband is a necessity, not an amenity, and tribal communities in particular have so many deep infrastructure concerns. Undersecretary Vilsack's leadership, there's been a real intention to lean into tribal consultations and have an open ear and engage directly to really understand both the challenges and opportunities. There are a range of carve-outs across our infrastructure programs aimed to specifically provide grant resources to tribal communities to ensure those with the most need have access to the dollars that are the most helpful. And I'll just end by saying the Strike Force initiatives in the budget, I think, will be really important in the Colonias, in the Native communities, in Appalachia, where boots on the ground and technical assistance resources aimed at bringing a whole of government approach to these long-term challenges will be a critical effort.
Well, I want to thank you for your effort, and Ms. Pingree, who chairs the Interior and other related agencies, which includes the Bureau of Indian Education and Health Resources. And I'm on that committee as well, too. Look forward to working with you and to make sure that broadband is strong all over the rural parts of this country. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. McCollum. At this time, I'm delighted to yield to my friend and fellow Blue Dog, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Henry Cuellar. Mr. Cuellar, you are now recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your leadership, and also to the ranking member. Again, I want to thank both of y'all. Mr. Chairman, thank you for putting this hearing together, and I certainly want to thank Undersecretary Maxon, Dr. Neal, Mr. Parker, Mr. McLean. Thank you so much. I look forward to working with all of y'all. Undersecretary Maxon, I want to say thank you. I saw your written statement. You mentioned colonias, and I just heard you use the word colonias again, and I am so happy because I think you and I are going to be on the same page. So first of all, thank you for that. I have 3 questions, but 2 of those questions will be submitted in writing. One of them has to do with the, we're concerned about the status of several electric cooperatives through the state of Texas that have incurred significant debt by keeping the power on during that difficult time. Again, my opinion, I think it was a problem with ERCOT, but still now we got those electric cooperatives that are suffering. So we will send you a detailed question on that. I also, my parents were farm workers, so anything we can do to help farm workers, I appreciate it. I will also send you a question to see what rural development can partner up with different organizations that are serving farm workers in the delivery of services and programs to them. So I will send you a question, but what I want to focus on today is colonias. I represent the border area. 4 of those counties, Hidalgo, Star, Zapata, Webb, even La Salle, are what we call strike force counties, home to border colonias. There are about 2.5 million residents living in colonias, communities that suffer from high rates of poverty along the southern border of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. As you know, those colonias are characterized by substandard housing, dirt roads, lack of access to potable drinking water, inadequate sewage disposal, and drainage system. On top of that, you got the problems of sometimes a poor education, health services, limited job opportunities, high unemployment rates, and of course, whether it's water or waste disposal infrastructure or broadband, as my other colleagues have talked about, I say that border colonias are considered a forgotten America. I've been dealing with colonias since I was in the state legislature, 1989, and they're still there. Thousands of them are there. So I would like to follow up on my, I got about 2.5 minutes or so, see if I can get your thoughts, but I would love to follow up with you, Mr. Undersecretary, and Dr. Neal and Parker and McLean also, because we need to have some sort of Colonia initiative coordinator. In the past, we used to look at EPA, but EPA only does one little part. I really feel, and I'll be on for another 20 minutes because I got a USDA announcement with rural development here in Atascosa County, and thank you so much. And I just have to say that if there's any agency that can build from underground to top all the way, it's USDA, and you probably are the fastest agencies that we work with in appropriations, at least my personal opinion. So I want to get your thoughts on that and ask you if I can follow up, Mr. Undersecretary.
Yes, sir. It's such an important issue. I have a deep, it resonates with me as an Appalachian person where I'm from, what generational poverty means and the challenges that it creates. And I'm hopeful the new Strikeforce 2.0 has a real potential to be the sort of focused effort that brings all of USDA and strategic connections to other agencies in really deep ways to provide the range of assistance that communities need, from infrastructure to human capital to technical assistance. And I think USDA is unique in the breadth of tools that we have, but building local relationships and connections to actually understand the challenges in the places, in my sense, is the critical thing. We can't define the solutions. We need to be close enough to the ground in communication to understand the challenges and the possibilities. And Strikeforce 2.0 under the Secretary's leadership, I think will be that. So I really look forward to the opportunity to have additional conversations with you about how we pursue that.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. I believe your time has expired. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ming. Ms. Ming, you are now recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, and your whole team for the work that you do and for being here today. I wanted to ask about rural water infrastructure. As you know, this pandemic has really highlighted the importance of having non-contaminated water for drinking, hand washing, and hygiene. Reports estimate that 60,000 community water systems in America, of the 60,000, 93% of them serve populations of fewer than 10,000 people. Old water supply systems pose a huge risk to public health, as corroding pipes can leach lead and copper directly into drinking water supply. This problem also disproportionately affects communities of color in rural America, with Black and Latino neighborhoods in upstate New York, for example, being 12 times more likely to get lead poisoning than children in white neighborhoods. It's clear that fixing this problem will take a cross-agency, whole-of-government effort. I was grateful to see that President Biden's top-line budget supports increasing the Rural Water and Wastewater Grants and Loans Program. And I was wondering how USDA intends to use this proposed increased funding to the grant and loan program.
Thank you for that. I will ask Acting Administrator McLean to take that one on.
Thank you very much, and thank you for raising an extraordinarily important problem. And we were all so encouraged to hear the President mention, water, broadband, electric grid. At RUS, we were cheering when the President addressed the joint session of Congress, and specifically mentioning this question about lead. And so we take that as a mandate to get the lead out and work hard on this problem. And what's nice about the RUS water program is it has probably the largest panoply of opportunities, everything from our circuit rider program, where we can put technical assistance on the ground to help individual communities. And we have technical assistance grants that can help with those pre-application. We've got the search grants on pre-application. And then we have the loan grant and loan grant combination opportunities to be able to build infrastructure. So it is very, very important, and the quality of water is, again, essential to the quality of life. And we have at this moment about $3 billion of applications in our queue ready to go, and we have a lot of funding, but we have more applications than we do have funding, and we are again grateful to the committee for its strong support of the water program, and we're going to do everything we can to put that to its most effective use.
Thank you. I have one more quick question about the LAMP program, Local Agriculture Market Program, and the Value Added Produce Grant Program within LAMP has been really helpful to past efforts in developing more resilient local and regional food systems. I believe that LAMP is a key vehicle for those efforts to rebuilding back better as our country seeks to recover from this pandemic. But I was surprised to see that the administration was only requesting 15 million in traditional discretionary funding for the program, which is less than what our subcommittee had appropriated in the past. So just wondering what you might be able to tell us about your plans for LAMP and VAPG. And does this funding request include the Value Producer Grant Program?
Dr. Neal?
Thank you so much for that question and for your interest in these really important programs. We obviously are looking very closely at the budget and wanting to make sure that we can have resources for these programs. They have had an impact and they have been popular. We're also interested in thinking about, to your sort of larger question around food systems. You know, what are the other kinds of resources that we can inject into the food systems pathway? So we think about the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, other kinds of programs as well. And so really what we're wanting to do is address those issues. We know that the Value Added Producers Grant and LAMP and other programs can do that. And we want to make sure that we have a cohesive method of doing that. And we'll work with the budget to make sure that that happens as best we can.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to working with you on that. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Ming. That concludes the first round of questions. I guess I will go back to Dr. Neal regarding food deserts. Of course, you just touched on food and nutrition, but more than 40 million Americans still lack reasonable access to nutritious and affordable food, including 4.6 million in rural low-income communities. And as we've seen in the COVID-19 pandemic, having access to the healthy, affordable food is essential, and our system was too easily disrupted in the crisis. We are pleased that USDA administers the program through a community development finance institution that can raise private capital, provide financial and technical assistance, support local partnerships, and directly fund projects that improve food access in all communities with special focus in rural communities. We've got too many rural food deserts. Given your past experience, how can USDA build on the successful model, and how can the American Rescue Plan be used to further support equitable food systems, and how can we put grocery stores in rural communities where now they can't be afforded because it's just not commercially sound for the communities to support them. Can you give us some tips and a plan perhaps of how we can eliminate these deserts with grocery stores?
Yeah, thank you so much, Representative, for these really important questions. As a former lead of a CDFI loan fund, I'm certainly attentive to these issues and thoughtful about them. One of the things that we want to do is to think through how we can make sure that more CDFI entities, whether they're loan funds, community development banks, community development credit unions, or venture funds, that they have access to our programs, know how to access them, know how to engage with them, so that they can provide access to capital for the communities and the projects that mean the most. Many of those projects, which, as you note, are very much in line with the priorities of this administration. So I think there's really an opportunity there to engage, further engage more community development financial institutions in this work. We are, as mentioned when we talked about responding to Representative Ming's question as well, I mean, I think there are a number of programs that we have that can help address food deserts and those kinds of things. From one, thinking about the food itself, so things like the value-added producer grants and those kinds of things, but also thinking about the businesses that are going to serve as the entities through which that food is delivered. So, you know, these may be the IRP program, intermediary loan program that might help finance a business, or the RMAP, or Rural Micro Enterprise Assistance Program, which might again help finance these kinds of entities. And I think, you know, we want to be sensitive to the fact that there are a variety of business models that can be that can help address these issues, from traditional businesses to cooperatives and others. And we stand ready to assist and to work intentionally around that effort to help close those gaps.
Thank you. Let me shift gears a moment. Based on the information that we get from USDA every week, it looks like rural development is fully obligated to CARES funding for distance learning and telemedicine grants and Reconnect grants has put a lot of business and industry funding out there. The Rural Development 2021 supplemental funds and American Rescue Plan funds have not yet been obligated. Of those funds, I'm particularly interested in the $100 million for rural rental assistance and the $39 million for relief of direct single-family borrowers and for borrowers for home repair funds. These are among the poorest populations that you serve. Can you speak to any holdups or problems that you have in getting this assistance out and when it will be available?
Mr. Parker?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. The $39 million that was made available for single-family housing is going to be used to refinance borrowers who have been under forbearance due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got those funds have been moved into our IT systems and are available now to the agency to utilize. We expect to put out directions later in May regarding how those funds will be utilized, advising our field staff and the rural constituency on the use of those funds. And we plan to begin accepting applications for those dollars late May to early June. The funding, the $39 million in budget authority should allow us to make approximately $650 million in 502 direct loan funds and $18.8 million in the 504 repair loan.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Fortenberry.
I want to return to the broadband discussion, and let's just call it the gap. So we have to define the gap and close the gap. How are we defining the gap? How are we closing the gap?
Well, I'm sorry, I just lost internet. I'm actually in the Witten building and it just came back on. So
That's exactly what I'm talking about, the need for more broadband, right?
I apologize, Representative Fortenberry, but I'd need the question again.
That was perfectly on cue, perfectly timed. Thank you to the wonderful staff for teeing that up. Well done. Rural broadband, back to the discussion. I'm calling it the gap. How do we define the gap? How do we close the gap? So we have a mapping strategy, which appears to be fragmented. I'd like to discuss that. Closing the gap. Because I would say there's a whole spectrum of things that we can and spend so much time on, and we've done a lot of them today. But since broadband is such a bipartisan issue, there's so many funds flowing that way. It represents a huge, huge set of opportunities. Are we thinking critically about how to identify the gap and close the gap?
Chris McLean, would you like that one?
Oops. Yes, sir. I'm delighted to. Yeah, I think that's very, very good point. You got me reflecting back to the days when I was a young Senate staffer working on the Telecommunications Act in 1996. That gap is a shifting thing. It's a thing that moves through time. The goalposts do change as technology improves. And I think one of the ways to answer your questions is to look how we define our program availability. In the Reconnect program in rounds 1 and rounds 2, we set out to where is the worst gap? That was communities that had less than 10-1 service. And then where do we want to go as a minimum level? And we defined that in the funding opportunity as to build at least to 25.3. Now, what did we get? What were our results? Our results were far beyond that 25.3. We have a substantial, because we created incentives to go beyond the minimum. And as we put together the round 3 funding level, we're looking at that gap as to where to direct funding and then where to
okay, I think I'm following you. You're trying to use your resources in the most targeted way.
Yes, sir.
Where you have the biggest gap.
Yes,
but
sir.
Let's try to move to the conversation about the overall gap. Just give me the aggregate. Obviously, we have a mapping process in the federal government.
Yes.
Speak to that, where that is,
Sure.
how that will be updated, how quickly that will be. and then the innovative ways in which we are going to define the possibility of new delivery systems and how rapidly to close the gap.
Okay, yes, very good. Mapping first. Every RD Apply application and really all of our telecom applications start with a map. So we map what we invest in. We have the FCC's map, and the NTIA has a new map. Mapping for us is informative.
What does it say for the country?
It's mixed. In rural areas, you have a lot of you have lack of service. Particularly outside of highways, further away you get from the interstate highway system, the less service you have. Communities that we've been talking about this afternoon, tribal communities have some of the poorest amount of service.
What I think we need a simple set of statistics that is really definable around. I get the complexities. It's not just access, it's also affordability. Most urban communities have ready access, but the affordability is an issue. Many rural communities may have some providers, but again, the expense doesn't allow for this to happen. I have a very interesting situation where a mother in a 25,000 person community here, which is rural in character, sits in the parking lot with her child to try to get Wi-Fi so they can do the homework. So we want to move past that quickly. So you know the nature of the question. Perhaps if somebody wants to pick this up as well, I'm going to divert for a few moments in the few seconds that I have. The chairman and I worked on a rural placemaking innovation challenge grant for technical assistance in planning to create places where people want to live and work. I need an update status on the implementation of that from someone if we have a moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. And at this time, I'm happy to recognize Ms. Pingree, the gentlelady from Maine. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everybody on the team here for persisting and answering all of our questions. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. I want to talk a little bit about REAP, which is one of my favorite programs, if you can have a favorite. And I have a bill, the Agricultural Resilience Act, which looks at some policy changes, basically making sure that to the extent possible that the energy that is being used has the greatest possible impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So giving those a priority or set aside funding for those that would be underutilized technologies or with a particular focus on being effective demonstration projects. So I guess I'm just curious, and I know you can't decide in a minute here, but it's not just because it's my bill, but I think it's because the administration is really focusing on climate change, and on-farm renewable energy is a great cost saving to the farmer, as we know, and also a good place in rural America to demonstrate some of the opportunities of using renewable energy. So are there administrative changes in how you score, or just any ways you could go about doing it without legislation?
Dr. Neal?
Thank you again for this question, Representative. This is a really exciting opportunity. So we're excited about REAP as well. I've been on the job now for 1 month and 1 day, and it's one of the things I've heard a lot about and read a lot about. So I'm pleased that you asked the question. REAP is, we continue to manage that program. It has been very popular. We continue to use it. One of the things that we're pleased about is in the funding that you mentioned for the renewable energy pilot, where we're able to have a source of funding that we can use to pull from the best things that have worked in programs that we've had, and REAP is certainly one of those, where we might be in a position to pull out the things that work best from that and use that in portions of the renewable energy pilot, but then also think about what are some new and innovative things that we might be able to do. We've gotten some excellent feedback from the community, from across the country, for folks who are interested in underserved areas and underserved technologies, and making sure that these kinds of technologies are available in equitable format across the country in a variety of ways. And so we are, particularly with this renewable energy pilot, are looking forward to developing that program. A panel is convening, a multi-agency panel is convening to really look at that work and help us figure out how we can develop a program that will begin to meet or continue really to meet the needs that you've outlined.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll look forward to seeing, what kind of opportunities you develop and working with you on that going into the future. The other question I just wanted to ask a little bit about is related to PFAS, which I know is a overwhelming and complicated issue that impacts so many agencies, but will impact the USDA in a variety of ways. And our state has had some issues with PFAS contamination in rural areas, and in some places it has made wells that people use for drinking water, which are particularly important in rural communities. Some of them have been they can no longer use them because of the contamination. So I'm just interested in ways that rural development might be able to support those households where the private well is too contaminated, in terms of remediation or other ways that they could facilitate where those challenges are, and where I'm sure we'll continue to have more challenges.
Administrator McClain, could you take a crack at that?
I would be delighted to, and Congresswoman Pingree, your question could not be more timely. In a very short period of time, you should be seeing a new announcement from USDA Rural Development about distributed water resources, and it is a revolving fund where we'll work with organizations who can then relend those funds to individual homeowners who are having problems with their wells, and so that is one of the opportunities. Plus, again, the core programs that we have, our circuit riders are available to be able to help communities plan out maybe distributed water systems as to hook up people who've had contaminated wells to water system water, if that is feasible. But the time of your question could not be better, because we're just moving along that documentation to make that announcement in the very near future that the program for individual wells, a relending program, is about to be announced soon.
Great. Well, thank you for both of those answers, and I do appreciate the revolving loan fund. I think one small challenge will be making sure people are aware of it and can access it, because often if you're the one person with a bad well in a rural area, you don't necessarily know there's a revolving loan fund. But again, thank you. I'll look forward to the announcement. If it's a really great program, I'll take full credit for asking you about it in this committee, and our committee will take full credit for it as well. But thank you so much, and thank you again to everybody for your answers.
Thank you, Ms. Pingree. At this time, I'm delighted to recognize for a second round, Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just to follow up on the gentlelady from Maine, that wastewater and drinking water, those revolving loans, they're and grants, they're very, very important to our rural communities, you can imagine. I'm just going to ask a couple of aspects of the broadband. One is that under the Reconnect program, I'm just curious, why does it have to be fixed terrestrial broadband? Why is satellite not allowed under it? Because I specifically asked because there actually is one part of my district where you can't run physical cable and it's not line of sight. So satellite would make a lot of sense there. Can you just give me the background on why satellite is excluded?
Well, sure. We in the early round, we were able to fund the ground stations. Of course, we didn't certainly have any money to be able to fund launching of satellites, of course. But it was a question of trying to direct the funding to where it could do the most value, and that's what we're trying to grapple with right now in constructing the round 3 funding notice. We just closed our comment period on our Reconnect regulation, and it's a very robust record, and we'll be evaluating that, and we'll be looking at questions exactly like that, or what kind of technologies we want to include in and out of this funding round. And so this is definitely a timely question as we figure out how round 3 will look.
But you would not need statutory authority. I mean, you would have the authority to include satellite if you decided to do it.
Again, to the extent that we could afford it, yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And and now I also have electric cooperatives. A lot of rural areas do electric cooperatives. Chop Tanks, one of the big ones in my district, and it actually has applied to do some of the rural broadband. It makes sense. They have a lot of backbone. They have infrastructure. The state legislature had to change a few things to allow them to do it. But how, in a national basis, how important are the electric cooperatives as some of the routes for getting broadband out to their customers?
Well, if I may take that question, I'm delighted with that question. I'm the acting administrator of the RUS, but my day job is to be the head of the RUS electric program. And so the answer to your question is absolutely essential. We're very, very proud of the work that rural electric cooperatives are doing to be able to be a catalyst for broadband deployment. Because your electric grid of the 21st century is as much about moving information as it is about moving electrons. And so smart grid technologies are needed desperately by the electric utilities, service providers. And that provides a synergy and a catalyst for broadband deployment. And we're seeing rural electric cooperatives apply for the Reconnect program. We're seeing rural electric cooperatives deploy deploy fiber-based smart grid. A little factoid here that's fascinating to me. In fiscal year 20, I financed slightly more fiber for rural electric service providers than I did power lines because of this great push on smart grid and all of the possibilities that opens up for network reliability, grid security, and improve service, and to be able to preempt outages and add to the efficiency of the grid. So that synergy between rural electric cooperatives and broadband is a natural. We love it when we see rural cooperatives work together with local telco companies to be able to team up and provide services. So it's an important trend. You also saw in the reverse auctions at the FCC, rural electric cooperatives did very well in winning a number of those territories, and they're bringing out, they're again combining their electric service needs with their community's demand for broadband. So that's a thank you for that great question, and we do agree that co-ops are very important.
No, thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harrison. I'd like to yield at this time to Mr. Valadeo of California. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Section 514 and 516 Farmer Housing Direct Loans and Grants Program is important for my constituents. I represent a major agricultural region in the United States that produces more than 400 agriculture crops. I know firsthand how critical our farm workers are to our nation's economy and getting food on the table of millions of Americans. Section 514 and 516 are the only federal programs that provide affordable loans and grants to purchase, construct, or repair housing for America's farm laborers. Farm workers have the worst housing needs of all people living in rural communities. President Biden's initial skinny budget for fiscal year 2022 is silent on rural housing. Do you have any plans to improve upon Section 514 and 516 housing programs? If so, which I hope you do, would you please detail these plans for the committee? I think you're muted there.
I'm sorry. Mr. Parker, do you have thoughts there?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the question, Congressman. For our farm labor housing program, 516, for this fiscal year, we've issued that notice on February 2nd, putting out a notice of applications for $36 million. What we did to get out that notice is we worked with a lot of the farm workers stakeholder community, also talking to organizations to ensure that we were bringing in the right aspects into that notice. Things where we've raised the maximum loan amount up to $5 million, permitting applications to be submitted along with a cycle that works with the low-income housing tax credits and other local funding award cycles, and also putting up, for transparency's sake, our applications, making those available as at the end of the funding period so that people can see the applications that were there and the ones that were approved and the scoring around that, so people that had not received funding in the past would be able to work towards a better application in the future. We certainly plan on continuing to work with those organizations, and we've had a lot of strong positive feedback on this year's notice, but we plan to continue to work with those farm housing stakeholder organizations to bring in their advice and input to improve in future years.
Do you have any additional insight you can share with the committee related to rural development's obviously outside of the ag guest worker, ag worker housing, but other equally important housing assistance programs? And it obviously plays a vital role, and housing prices seem to continue to rise, especially here in California.
So yes, sir. Rental assistance, our 515 multifamily housing direct loan program, certainly are always in need of funding. We're going to fully utilize our guaranteed multifamily housing, our full utilization of rental assistance this year, full utilization of the Rural Housing Service voucher funding, as well as the funding that's provided through the American Rescue Plan for the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll fully utilize those funds starting at the end of May, early June, to cover overburdened rental tenants inside our 515 households. So appreciate all of the assistance from the committee in making those funds available.
All right, appreciate it. And then change course a little bit. It's no secret that the Western United States is in the midst of a severe drought that does not appear to have an end in sight. This disaster will, without a doubt, have a rippling effect on rural communities in the West, like those in my district. A few weeks ago, the Biden administration established an interagency drought relief working group, of which USDA Secretary Vilsack is part. And while it is encouraging to hear the Biden administration is acknowledging the emergency in the West, it is not clear that what the working group plans to do to combat this issue. There is no time to waste. Please describe how you plan to work with the Secretary and the working group to combat consequences of this critical drought. And I know I've only got a little bit of time left, but appreciate it quick.
Just super quickly, I would say that we take seriously that disaster and recognize, fortunately, that RD has a range of tools from the small business side to some of the infrastructure tools. I think probably the most important thing is our boots on the ground, that our staff in those states are aware of the challenges, are in conversations with lots of stakeholders, and we will aim to filter that information up to the Secretary, up to the task force to ensure that they have accurate and grounded information based on the strength of that staff.
All right. Well, I'm out of time. I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you as we move forward in the drought.
Yes, sir. For sure. It's a disaster.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Valadeo. That will complete round two. We have a few members still in the meeting, and I'd like to start around three. I just have one question. It has to do with rural housing preservation. I just wanted to take a minute to ask about the rural housing programs that are operated by RD. I have a question on both the multifamily and the single family housing. Housing instability, of course, can lead to adverse health effects, and it can compromise the development of children. And as you likely know, that's a significant threat to the USDA's multifamily housing portfolio, with an impending wave of maturing mortgages over the next several years. A 2016 report indicated that the 20-year cost to preserve and maintain the portfolio totals $5.6 billion. Can you please explain what the department plans to do to preserve the affordable housing stock and increase the number of units or construct new units so that families can have greater access to affordable homes? And then let me go to the second question, and that's, I wish to touch on the subsidy recapture. As some of my constituents have called it, surprise billing, when they sell and transfer their property that's been financed with a Section 502 loan. I wanted to ask, should we be revisiting the practice of implementing subsidy recapture, which really catches many of these borrowers unawares and it can have a substantial impact on their finances when they think that they are able to sell what has been an asset that they have fully paid for.
Chad, a quick response?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Congressman. I think the biggest pieces around rural housing preservation for our multifamily housing program would be clearing the backlog of the 515 properties that we have awaiting for preservation. We've got 171 projects that are right now awaiting funding to undergo the rehabilitation and preservation. Those projects are shovel ready. We would be able to move on those within 30 to 60 days upon receipt of the appropriation. And we've got a lot of energy aspects that would be a part of those rehabilitation. So it would help those multifamily housing providers to be able to control their operating expenses as well as part of that. Also, as far as that preservation piece, addressing our underfunding of the multifamily housing preservation program in the long run would be important. And then looking at potential funding of rental assistance for unassisted tenants inside the Section 515 portfolio, allowing a funding stream for those our borrowers, the multifamily housing providers, to be able to reinvest in their facilities. As far as the subsidy recapture piece, the single is under our Single Family Housing Direct 502 program. Whenever we provide a payment subsidy around the interest rate, it builds up a subsidy over time. Statute requires us, USDA, to recapture that funding if the owner of the property leaves the property, no longer resides in the property or sells the property. It was not always a requirement. Back in 1979 was when subsidy recapture was instituted. So there was a time frame when subsidy recapture didn't take place. I think USDA would welcome the opportunity for there to be a change in that statute to allow us to reconsider that provision, sir.
So that will require some legislation on our part and on the part of Congress to eliminate that recapture requirement.
That is correct, sir. We require legislation. It would also impact because the recapture of those funds is calculated into our subsidy rate for the Single Family Housing Direct Loan Program. So there would be a loss of that recapture funding. So it would increase the subsidy rate for our program. Sir.
Okay, we'd like to talk a little bit more about that because it seems to work a hardship and it really takes away from the ultimate wealth building of the people that you're actually serving who are in those rural communities. And we're really trying to really enhance their wealth, to build capacity and wealth. And of course, this is something that at the last minute is a surprise cost that takes away. So we want to revisit that. Mr. Fortenberry, I would like to yield to you at this time for any additional questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got to return back to the broadband question, given the timeliness of it and the seriousness of it. And in our 2 10-minute dialogues, we just don't seem to be connecting on the intention of my question. So let me try it this way. Give our rural broadband deployment a grade. Give rural broadband deployment a grade. Where are we? A, B, C, D, or F?
I'm going to take a crack at it with your acknowledgement. At 105 days, it may not be fully satisfactory. And I would just say what feels important to me right now is a recognition that rural broadband deployment is becoming a national priority. And while there have been investments up to this point, it feels like today, through the AJP and the work of this committee around Reconnect, we're reimagining what is possible with a depth of investment, a scale of investment, and a level of collaboration and coordination that will allow what is in my sense, a real possible goal of 100% with significant speed. I think the American Jobs Plan, similar to your earlier statement, provides the resources not only to count the expansion of broadband, but the tools and the opportunities that broadband creates toward livability.
Yeah,
And
the
that's
meaning of broadband, and that's very important. So it's actually three things: defining the gap, closing the gap, understanding the meaning of what this delivery is, and measuring it that way as well. So look, okay, now we're aligned in terms of intentionality. Now I think we have to put the tools in place. You use the words reimagining. This is an emerging priority, bipartisan priority. There's a lot of money out there on this, and probably is going to be coming, and we got to do it right. And because it's here, I mean, let's leverage it.
Yes, sir. The Secretary is clear that there's an opportunity to lean into rural broadband, a moonshot. Not because of broadband in itself is important. It's what it allows communities to do, to participate in the broader economy, to see their loved ones, when they're separated, to do precision agriculture, to lean into the uses in a way that transform what's possible in rural communities. And that's the vision, I think, that American Jobs Plan is anchored on, is all about livability and the role that broadband can play in that transition.
Okay, so we're going to have to work on definitions. We're going to have to work on metrics that don't default just to the things that are measurable, and some sensitive measures, if you will, toward these broader concepts that aren't just abstractions, they are realities. They're just harder to measure. So with that said, let me move to the other question, and maybe you can answer this one as well. So thank you. That's a great answer. I appreciate it. Rural Placemaking Innovation Challenge grants that we put in the last bill. Where are we? It goes to the heart of the question, what we're trying to answer here. And that's why we did it. That's why the chairman and I worked on this.
Yes, sir. It's an important program. I think we agree with you that part of why it should be spotlighted is it helps communities imagine the sort of community they want to live in, how high-speed broadband, access to quality education, access to healthcare, an economy with good paying jobs. Some communities need help in accessing the planning and other skills necessary to make those.
I think Representative Pingree actually had a tangential reference to the same sentiments earlier in her question. So before I run out of time, though, where are we on the implementation of this?
Yes, sir. It's right now there's a notice of funds available going through clearance, and my expectation is that it will be available quite soon, and I will follow up with you about that clearance process to give you the specifics of that. But the notice of funds available is developed. I know the funds are set aside because I've been part of multiple conversations about that, and we expect the notice to be available soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deputy Undersecretary Maxson, Dr. Neal, Mr. Parker, Mr. McLean, thank you so very much for your testimony and for spending the afternoon with us. We understand how incredibly busy you are these days, and so we are really grateful for your time and your courtesies in being with us. The Rural Development Mission Area provides services and programs to rural America that promote economic development by assisting our rural areas with access to capital through loans and grants to build critical infrastructure, including our water systems, broadband networks, and housing. And many, many people don't realize the enormous role that your agency has in developing and assisting rural America. And so I appreciate your hard work. This subcommittee appreciates the hard work and the hard work of your staffs to provide rural Americans the opportunities to overcome geographic inequities that have limited the growth and the development of rural America. And we hope that you'll be able to provide brighter opportunities for a better future. Along with what we've discussed, we will perhaps forward some additional questions for the record, and we would appreciate your diligence in getting responses to us in as quick and as timely a manner as you can. But thank you again for being here. Thank you for indulging us and for the information that you were able to share. Mr. Fortenberry, do you have any closing remarks?
No, other than to say thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's been a very important discussion about a wide-ranging breadth of things, programs that are all pointed toward a more vibrant, again, ecosystem of livability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry, and thank you to all of the members in attendance, and thank you to the staff who put this hearing together and who helped us run it very smoothly. So thank you for your work. With that, the subcommittee is now adjourned.